The world knew him as the little tramp, a symbol of hope and laughter in a world that had forgotten how to smile. They saw the slapstick, the gentle wit, the iconic walk that defined an era. But they never saw the man behind the mustache. They never saw the pain. At the height of his power, in the twilight of the 1930s, Charles Spencer Chaplin was the most famous man on earth. A visionary and a tyrant, a genius whose films built an empire. But the empire had a secret. The tramp was a myth. The man was a ghost. His sorrow was a quiet, insidious thing. It began with a final, shuddering breath. His mother, Hannah Chaplin, a woman who had given him the world and then lost her mind too. It was gone. Her death wasn't just a loss. It was a final, devastating act in the theater of his life. It stripped away his last connection to a past he desperately wanted to forget and could never escape. He became a fortress of a man, his heart a locked vault. He directed, he produced, he commanded, but he couldn't feel. His genius, once a conduit for his humanity, became a shield. He was a millionaire trapped in a gilded cage of his own making, a king on a throne of ice. The world saw his triumphs. He felt only the cold. One night, the cold became unbearable. A premiere of one of his great pictures had left him hollow, the thunderous applause just a deafening echo in his empty soul. He wanted to disappear. He drove not to his sprawling estate, but to a forgotten neighborhood, a place that felt like the London of his youth, a place of shadows and ghosts. He found himself outside an old, dusty theater, a relic from a time before he was a god. The marquee was faded, the glass of the ticket booth long shattered. A sign read, "The Majestic," but there was nothing majestic about it now. He slipped inside, a shadow among shadows, and sat in the last row. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, dust, and 1,000 forgotten lives. The stage was empty, a lonely box of shadows, but in the wings a quiet drama unfolded. A woman, a cleaner, her back hunched with age, was folding linens. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace, her presence almost non-existent. A family, a mother, a father, and a little girl emerged from the shadows, their faces pale and streaked with tears. The mother clutched a small white handkerchief, a simple piece of cotton. The family had just come from a viewing, a funeral, a child. The little girl had lost her brother. Chaplin, from his dark corner, watched as the grieving mother approached the old cleaner. "It was his," she whispered, her voice choked with sorrow. "He always kept it with him." The mother handed the cloth to the old woman. Could you just hold it for a moment?" The old woman took the cloth, her gnarled hands receiving it with a reverence that stunned Chaplin. She didn't just hold it, she brought it to her heart, and her frail body began to tremble. A single silent tear, thick with the weight of a sorrow that was not her own, fell from her eye and landed on the handkerchief. It was an act of pure, distilled empathy. The trembling stopped. She gently folded the handkerchief and handed it back to the mother. "He is not gone," the old woman whispered, her voice a fragile melody. "He has become a story." The mother, who had been a statue of pain, looked at the handkerchief, then at the old woman. A flicker of relief, a fragile spark of hope, passed over her face. The father, who had been stiff with unspoken agony, let his shoulders drop. The little girl, who had been crying silently, took her mother's hand and for the first time looked up, her eyes no longer vacant. The family walked away, their grief not gone, but somehow softened. This was no performance. This was something beyond reason. This was something that broke through the fortress wall of Chaplin's heart. He felt a stir, a flicker of something he had not felt in years: curiosity. He was the world's master of illusion, and he had just witnessed an illusion he could not explain. He watched the old woman disappear into the shadows, a humble, forgotten figure who held a power he, the King of Hollywood, could not comprehend. What was this mysterious woman? What secret did she hold that could soothe a grief so profound? And could it be the key to his own? The greatest stories are the ones we can't explain, and the best is yet to come. Stay with us as we unravel this impossible truth. And make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the secrets we're about to reveal. The next day, Chaplin returned to the theater, his mind a storm of logic and disbelief. He found the old woman by a stage door sweeping the floor. She was a frail wisp of a thing. Her name, he learned, was Agnes. He approached her, his voice a low, furious rumble. "I saw what you did," he said, his eyes narrowed, searching for the trick. The family, the handkerchief, the tears. It was a charade, wasn't it? A stage trick. What did you say to them? What did you do? Agnes didn't look up. Her broom continued its rhythmic sweep. "There was no trick, Mr. Chaplin," she said, her voice like rustling leaves. "Only a truth you of all people should understand. You, the master of making sorrow beautiful. Truth. Truth is what I deal in," he retorted, the anger now afire in his chest. "I create illusions that are more real than life itself. You are a fraud, a charlatan. Tell me what you did." Agnes stopped sweeping. She looked at him. Her eyes, though clouded by age, were a deep, calm sea. "The handkerchief was not theirs," she said softly. "It was a cloth of the boy's. The mother gave it to me, not to clean, but to hold his last moments. You see, when someone dies, they leave something behind. Not in this world, but in our hearts. The memories, the pain, the love. The mother was holding on to the pain so tightly she couldn't breathe. I took a moment to hold it for her. I took her pain and remembered my own. The loss of her child is a terrible thing, Mr. Chaplin." The words struck him like a physical blow. "Your own," he whispered. "My son," she said, her gaze distant. "He never saw me dance. I used to be a dancer a long time ago. He died before he could see my first performance. My pain, it was a raw wound for many years, but then I learned to dramatize it." "Dramatize?" he scoffed. "You mean pretend?" "No," she said, her voice firm. "To make it into a story, to give it a place in my heart where it can breathe. The tears you saw, Mr. Chaplin, they were my own, but they were also a memory of her son. The tear on the cloth was not for the boy. It was for the mother, to show her that her pain was not hers alone. It was shared. I didn't take her pain away. I simply carried it with her for a moment." Chaplin stood there, dumbfounded. He, the master storyteller, was being told a story that defied all his rules of logic and reason. He, the man who controlled every frame of his film, was confronted with a reality he could not edit, could not cut away. The grief, the memories, the quiet strength of this old woman. It was a world away from his own. It was a world he had abandoned a long time ago. A world where emotions were not a weakness to be hidden, but a strength to be shared. He was a man who hid his pain behind a performance. She was a woman who used her pain to heal others. "I don't understand," Chaplin said, his voice now a plea. "How can you share a feeling? How can you turn grief into a story? It's a madness. I have to live with my own madness, with the memories, my mother's cries. They still haunt me." Agnes looked at him, her face filled with a deep, knowing pity. "You don't understand because you've been running from it," she said softly. "You hide behind your empire, your fame, your tramp. You think that if you create enough noise, the silence of the past will not be able to reach you. But the past is not a ghost to be exorcised. It is a part of you." She led him out of the theater and into a small, overgrown garden. There, a small stone bench sat in the shade. "When my son died, I couldn't bear to be in a house without his laughter. So I came here. I sat here every day and I cried. But I didn't just cry. I remembered. I remembered the way his eyes would light up when I told him a story. The way he would pretend to be a soldier, marching through the house with a stick for a sword. I took those memories, and I turned them into a little play in my mind. I wrote his story in my heart, and I played it out in my tears. And slowly, my pain became a performance, not for an audience, but for myself. It was the only way I could carry it. That's what I did for that mother. I gave her a piece of my own little play, and she understood. She saw that her pain could also be a story, that it didn't have to be a dark, empty hole, but a place where her love and memory could live. Chaplin listened, his face a mask of shock and awe. He had spent his life creating stories from slapstick, from human folly, from the struggle of the poor. But this woman, this simple cleaner, she was creating stories from the most painful of human experiences. She was taking grief and turning it into a work of art. She was a genius, a different kind of genius, a kind he had forgotten how to be, a kind he thought was a weakness. The old woman pointed to a small, almost invisible path that led out of the garden. "There is a place I visit," she said, "a place for stories that have no words, a place for memories that must be laid to rest. Come with me, Mr. Chaplin, and let me show you how to write the final chapter of your mother's story." Chaplin hesitated. He was the most powerful man in Hollywood, a man who commanded thousands, a man who had the world at his feet. And yet, this one frail woman had him completely disarmed. He was standing at a crossroads. He could retreat into the safe, numb world of his fame, or he could take a chance and confront the one thing he had been running from his entire life. He looked at the old woman's calm, peaceful face. He saw not a cleaner, not a ghost, but a mirror reflecting the man he was supposed to be. And for the first time in years, he chose to be vulnerable. He chose to take the hand of a woman who had nothing to give but wisdom and everything to teach. He chose to write a new story. He chose to live. He took a deep, shuddering breath and followed her. They walked in silence until they reached a small, peaceful cemetery, the kind that existed only in the forgotten corners of a city. She led him to a small, worn gravestone, almost hidden by overgrown grass. The name was Hannah, the final resting place of a woman who had given him everything. Chaplin knelt. He was no longer the tramp or Mr. Chaplin, the Hollywood mogul. He was just a son, a boy who had lost his mother and had been carrying that loss for so long it had become a part of him. The grief, once a frozen lake, began to crack. He touched the stone, and the tears, the silent, raging tears he had been holding back for years, finally came. They were not just for his mother, but for himself, for the boy who had been so broken, for the man who had become so lost. Agnes knelt beside him, her presence a silent, comforting anchor. "Feel it," she whispered. "Don't run. Don't hide. Give it a face, give it a body, give it a story." And so he did. With every tear, with every choked sob, he remembered. He remembered her face, her songs, her laugh, her madness and her pain. He saw her as the final majestic character in a film of his own making. He gave her a final bow, a final close-up, a final goodbye. He understood for the first time that her pain was not a flaw, but a part of her story. He began to dramatize his own pain, to turn it into the silent language of the tramp. He imagined the little tramp, not just as a figure of slapstick, but as a poet of sorrow, a hero of silent tears. He understood that the tramp's walk, his hat, his cane, his every gesture, they were all a dramatization of his own pain, a story he was telling to the world without saying a single word. He was finally, truly, the artist he was meant to be. He returned to the theatre, not as the arrogant tyrant he had been, but as a man transformed. He was still the king, but his kingdom was no longer built on fame and fortune. It was built on a foundation of empathy, of shared human experience. He had learned from a humble cleaner that true power lay not in the ability to command, but in the ability to feel. He had learned that his art, his genius, was not just a tool for entertainment, but a vessel for connection. He had always made the world laugh. Now he knew he could make them feel. He could use his own pain to tell a story so profound it would heal the hearts of others. The final image is not of a king on a throne, but of a man at peace. Chaplin, years later, would sit in his study, a warm fire crackling in the fireplace. The little tramp was now a memory, but the man had finally found his way home. He would look at a small, worn handkerchief, carefully folded and placed on his desk. A silent reminder of a woman who had no power, no fame, and no wealth, but who had given him the greatest gift of all, the courage to be human. He had always told stories of the outsiders, the outcasts, the downtrodden. Now he finally understood them. He had finally joined them, and in doing so, he had become the greatest storyteller of all. His films would go on to be classics, but the real masterpiece was the man who had learned to turn his own silent tears into a timeless work of art. So we ask you, what part of Chaplin's story, the man behind the myth, touched you the most? Share your thoughts below and subscribe to see more stories that change everything.